So Eric or Nick, did you guys want to come up and talk a little bit about this process to get these folks oriented? And you guys grab some coffee and food, please, please, please.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Schiller. I'm one of the folks working on the Save Our Vote campaign, and I help run the signature collection effort for Initiative 76 and Initiative 71. So the process is really pretty clear. If you're a DC resident, it's really easy. If you live outside of the District of Columbia, the first thing you have to do before you can get hired is to go to the Board of Elections on Monday. And you have to register as an out-of-state petition circulator at the Board of Elections if you don't live in the District of Columbia. If you do live in the District of Columbia, I've got 4 sets of pieces of paper here. One of them is your W-9. Just fill that out. That's so we can pay you if you plan on getting working on this for pay. If you're a volunteer, you don't have to fill this out. Just general code and conduct. On the back side, we have you sign, print your name, and know that you've read everything. This is do's and don'ts, best practices, and we can actually go over some of the ways the petition has to be filled out. We anticipate getting the petition on Tuesday, and so there's a lot of minutia that you need to know about how to fill out a petition properly. And we'll go over that a little bit, but and the last one, we have the offered rates for petition circulators. It's an important part of the entire process is to get in the number of signatures that we have to get. It's roughly about 25,000. It's 5% of all the registered voters in 5 of the 8 wards of the District of Columbia. We probably have about 2.5 weeks to collect all of those, which means we have to be running at a breakneck speed of over probably 10,000 per week, which means each one of us collecting over 100 would be great. If we can collect even more, that even better. So if you have any questions, you can probably come up to me. First things first though, fill out the W-9 and sign the Code of Conduct. If anyone like these, I've got a folder you can fill it out and some pens. You can.
It might also be helpful to let folks know numbers of people that have already sort of come on board.
So we've hired approximately 100 people so far. We anticipate hiring probably another 100 more. It's not an easy job, so it involves a lot of walking and talking and hustling. And people will sign up for it, and then they'll try it for a couple days, and they'll be like, you know what, this isn't my thing, I'm going to move on. And so we have to keep hiring people the entire time, otherwise we'll have the numbers dwindle, and if the numbers dwindle, then we won't be on schedule. If we're not on schedule, then we're not going to be able to get the referendum on the ballot. So just I'm going to describe the referendum process in general. There's ballot initiatives and there are referendums. A ballot initiative initiates from the people and a referendum refers to legislation. So when a law is passed by the DC Council and we don't like that law, we the people can actually start the process of a referendum. And that process begins when the chairman of the council transfers the legislation to Congress. And once that legislation has been transferred to Congress, it starts a clock. 30 legislative days that people that want to have the law overturned have that small window of time. And it's there on paper, but it's stacked against us in the sense that they say that we can do it, but in reality it's really difficult to be able to do a referendum. A ballot initiative, on the other hand, is 180 days to collect the same amount of signatures. So 180 days versus 18 to 14 days. It's quite a bit of a difference, which means we have to have a small army of petition circulators out there ready to go when we get the petitions.
And that's why we're pushing in this stage to bring people on so that we can field as many people as possible. Because we know that we got to hit it, we got to be able to collect the signatures, we got to be able to validate the signatures, and that's terribly important. And folks will say, well, why do we want to do that? Well, you know, I always remind people of look at the history that this council has employed. This council has overturned numbers of voters' initiatives. The last one they overturned was when the people voted for term limits on them. They overturned that. People voted for campaign finance reform. They overturned that. People voted that homeless had the right to shelter. They overturned that. I mean, so they've had this history and this pattern which a home rule charter allows them to do that. But the question is it moral, is it right? Because all across the country, particularly right now, we're coming out of midterm elections where we've been fighting voter suppression all over the country. In Florida, in Georgia, you name it, wherever there was an election, you had to fight over voter suppression. And here, right up under our noses, we're not only practicing voter suppression, but voter nullification. And so it's important that if we get this on the ballot, it fires that kind of shot across the bow of the city council. Because right now, they figure that there's no downsides to it. They don't have to be held accountable, they can't be held accountable. But if you do this, if we're successful in doing this, then it becomes clear that they are accountable to the people. It changes the whole ball game and the whole political discussion. And that's why it's so important that we actually push to get this on the ballot and do whatever we have to do that's necessary to get it on the ballot. Now, we do have, as Nick pointed out, we got that small window. Clock is ticking, all right? Clock is ticking. Clock started ticking from the moment the chairperson transmitted that repeal to Congress. And that was, what day was that?
October 30th.
Hmm?
October 30th.
October 30th, so it's been ticking, right? And so basically, but it's also predicated upon legislative days. So a lot of those days that we had, people were not there because they were engaged in midterm elections, right? But now, we come back after the Thanksgiving and all that, the clock really starts ticking because they're gonna be in session. And if they run the clock out, they can burn up 30 legislative days this calendar year, right?
So what happens, you have a lame duck Congress right now. So does that help us or not?
No, it doesn't, because a lame duck Congress can pass all kinds of legislation right on their way out the door. I mean, that's a part of the danger of a lame duck Congress, is that they can be engaged, and so they can really run the clock right up to the end, right? So that's why I'm saying they could burn up 30 legislative days on this side of the calendar. But if they don't, then the clock resets for us, beginning with the new Congress, right? The new count has to start all over again. So if they don't burn up 30 legislative days in 2018, the clock actually resets for us in 2019. We start all over with 30 legislative days. So again, we don't know what that is, so we got to push on this side as hard as possible, and we need to employ as many people as possible to help make this push successful.
So can be an injunction filed within their 30 days left if they're trying to make a bill out the door to put an injunction on a bill so it won't go through their 30 days, it'll bypass?
No.
The congressional review, you can't do an injunction.
It's just what is. It's a part of what exists, so there's nothing you can do about that. That just clock ticks, right? Our job is to get 25,000 valid signatures to get it on the ballot. Because even if you get it on the ballot, even before the people vote on it, you basically repeal the city council's repeal simply because it's on the ballot.
Good question. With getting 25, how many do we have to shoot for to know we're going to get 25 on average based on how many bad signatures you tend to get, even if you're working really hard? Like, we need 35 or 50.
I got you. That really depends on validity. So, for example, with Initiative 71, when we started out, we were running really poor validity, right? So to get 5,000 in the week, you had to bring in 10 if you run it 50%.
Yeah.
If you run it really efficient, bring in 10,000, you run it 80%, that's 8,000. You know what I'm saying? Same work, but you breezing through the actual workload. So it really depends on having proficient work. And I brought some petitions in so we can all look at them and know which. Has anybody done signature collection before? All right, so you already know what it's like. I don't need to show you petitions. We're just not when we're doing proficient work and we're just taking our time asking the questions and slowing the process down while you got somebody out like this.
The other thing I was just going to say from my experience with canvassing is that your state of mind and the energy you project is like 90% of the job.
For sure.
If you start to think nobody gives a shit and they're not going to talk to you, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. No one will talk to you. And you have to keep approaching people. When someone brushes you off or is listening to their headphones, you can't let it get to you. You can't ever think it's about you. You always have to know something is going on in this person's head or their life. It's not giving them the space to think about this. And then the challenging thing, I was reading that about don't engage with people who disagree with you. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because there are a lot of tipped workers where there is a conversation that has to happen. We don't necessarily need to do that with this campaign, but if we're just like, no, I don't want to talk to you because you are a waiter and you want to keep your salary, I think we're going to be burning a lot of bridges and allowing restaurants to do what they did. Because I couldn't believe it passed, to be honest, because of how many restaurants I was walking into who had their servers like weaponized to convince their customers to vote against 77. Like servers were wearing like, stop the, you know.
Save our tips.
So I'm just wondering if there's a little nuance to that,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like restaurant employees. Like,
Let me sort of clarify something also. From my perspective, this is what I've been saying to my church and other places. Whether you voted for Initiative 77 or voted against Initiative 77, it doesn't matter.
No,
It's about the vote now,
that's right.
right? You know, the fact is, if they can repeal this initiative, then they can repeal any other initiative that comes down the line. Let's say we want to save our neighborhoods from gentrification, and we put something on there that makes sense. Well, they'll overturn it. Why do we know that? Because they got a history of that now, right? So the issue is for us right now is not whether you voted for it or you voted against it. Is the vote sacred? Do we believe in democracy? And do we believe that votes just can be thrown away into the trash can? If we believe that, then we don't sign the petition. But if we believe that the vote is sacred, then it is up to us to sign the petitions. That's what I'm getting at, because I think the thing is that 77 has been litigated. It was litigated, and the decision came out at the polls. Right, so I'm not going back to relitigate that whole measure at this point. And because the issue is that that's already been decided, and should we just simply roll over and allow another vote to be swept and thrown into the trash? That's my position on that.
Another part of that is, here you are standing out, you've got your clipboard in hand, and person wants to engage you and have a discussion. You have 5 people walking by you at that time that you could have engaged, but because you're having a philosophical dialogue with someone that's not going to sign, they're wasting your time. And the signature election effort is about hustling. It's about talking to as many people as you can, getting them to sign. So if you're engaged in a philosophical discussion with someone, you're then not doing actually the hard work of actually collecting the signatures. I think you're right that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to talk about it, and talk about how they think that the sub-minimum wage is ethical, that it's okay to treat one group of workers differently from another group of
well,
workers.
there's probably also going to be a lot of people who want to talk about the merits of 77. Who voted
Yeah,
for
and
it.
I
It
think
passed.
there is an important discussion to have, but it's really about, I think, choosing how you deal with your time. Because you can have that discussion, but still be talking with other voters. If you're just having that one discussion with that one person, you've taken yourself out of the effort. And you can make quite a bit of money collecting signatures in an hour. If you get 10 people that are all registered voters, you just made $30 or $32.50 for that hour. But if you spend 15 minutes chatting with one person, then all of a sudden you just missed out on quite a few other people that have walked by.
To address a couple of, I just want to put a tab on what you're saying. Addressing what Reverend and what Nick is saying. All those things are true. I know you're really focused on like the people themselves and getting the message. And like Nick said, some people will just hold you up. But also filter while you're out there the authentic, the people who are just trying to take your time, and the people who are the negative interactions is really what the statement is really for. Some people just want to have negative interactions, right? That are not productive. You get to filter past them and move on to people who want to have a genuine interaction, like a restaurant worker who wants to speak about it, maybe they can flip. But the thing is, you can't hold with them, you can't hold them in court for too long. Because then it becomes that other person just trying to hold the time.
And there's going to be hit teams out there to tie you up.
For
And
sure.
they're going to be deliberate, and they're going to be targeted at you. How do I know that? Because when we did the press conference on announcing the referendum, they sent the hit teams specifically down to try to shout the press conference down, right? So I know that there's going to be hit teams, right? The issue is, and I said this at the night of the hearing, David and others, was that a couple women behind me, they stood up and screamed at Silverman, "What about us? Don't we count?" And I didn't think about my reaction because it wasn't premeditated. But they irked me, and I turned around and I said, "You should have voted then."
That's right.
The reality is they couldn't vote. They were not voters in DC. That was a lot of what we saw go down, even with all the stuff that was taking place in the restaurants, is that folks were not voters in DC.
Out of town.
Right, right. I mean, so they couldn't affect that issue. So basically, they went and said, well, overturn it for us, right? Since we can't vote. And then the other bogus argument was, well, I didn't know it was on the ballot. If I had known, maybe I'd gone and voted for it. Well, I'll tell you right up, I'm an independent, so I ain't got nothing to vote for on the ballot during primaries. I went down specifically to vote for this, because I tend to go to my polling place every single election day. Just habit, right? But I'm saying we gotta take that seriously. We can't sort of take it, and if it don't go our way, all of a sudden we want a backdoor approach to something else being done differently.
To address like that, why was it in the primary? DC election law. That's how it is. DC election law says that if you submit your petitions, you've got 180 days to do it. When you submit your petitions, they have to have an election within 54 to 114 days unless there's a previously scheduled election taking place. Which means they submitted in the springtime, the next election was the primary. They would have had it until like early July to be able to turn them in, but they would have already passed the deadline. Had they turned them in like late early July or June, it would have been in the general election.
And Nick, let me say this, because another one of the argument was, and has been, well, the language of the initiative was confusing. That language was also constructed by elections, by the Board of Elections, right? Just like right now, we went down with our referendum under one assumption of the language that was to be used, and the Board of Elections changed that language, right? Which is okay, but I'm just pointing out that a lot of the stuff is out of people's hands when the Board of Elections get it. And even now, if somebody were to challenge because we're in this period right now, this 10-day period where challenges can come in. But they don't challenge the referendum, they challenge the board. And they have to challenge the board in court, not at the election board. Because now out of the board's hands, the board basically approved the language and is allowed it to go forward and enter the process, so that's where we are. So that's why we got 100 and some folks that right now ready to start circulating petitions. We're trying to build, and we'll consistently build to get to the large number of folks out in the field that we need to get out there.
So if we do collect enough signatures, we'll have a special election within 114 days in 2019. So at that stage of the game, there will be quite a bit of getting out the vote. We'll probably have mailers to remind people. I mean, 77, the restaurant industry spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on mailers to be mailed to every single voter. In my house, I got 4 different vote no mailers within 2 weeks before the election. The Yes campaign spent nothing on mailers, and we still won. But it's one of those things about getting people aware of what's going on. You had a question?
Yes. So for those of us who are not DC residents, when we go down to the Board of Elections office, how long does the process take?
Almost instantaneous. You go in and you register to say, hey, I'm an out-of-state petition circulator. You fill out a form, and they keep a white copy. You walk out with the carbon copy.
What documentation they need to take?
You just need to bring your ID. That's your current valid government ID. It's going to ask you what election you're working on, what your address is, and that basically attests that you're going to be a petition circulator within the best of your ability. You're not going to lie on the petitions. But that's the most important thing for an out-of-state person. They have to go there first. You can't get hired. We can't give you petitions. Because if you were collecting petitions without registering as an out-of-state petition circulator first, then all your petitions are invalid. All those people that signed, all their signatures are invalid. And so we want to make sure that everyone is hired in an appropriate way.
How many special elections have we had here in DC?
Special elections, there's going to be one, I think, this month for the Board of Elections.
Board of Election, right.
I'm sorry, Board of Education. But referendums-wise, when it actually comes to a referendum, this will be, I think, the 4th one people voted on in the 45.
This is number 8.
This is number 8, but that doesn't mean that people actually have voted on it. So the referendum number 7 was an attempt to prevent the previous Mayor Fenty from taking over the school board. And so they started that process. They submitted the language. Once you submit the language to the Board of Elections, it's like, oh, that's a referendum number, and that was number 7. But as far as the people voted on, they voted on one, I believe, in 84, 85, 1990, 1991. Of the 3 referendums that DC voters have voted on, 2 of them passed, 1 of them failed. And the one that failed was the right to shelter, which overturned part of Initiative 17 in 1990. It was one of the largest elections. It was the year that Marion Barry actually lost. It was such a big election that year. But as far as what we're doing, we're going to make history. No one's ever collected the number of signatures that we're going to collect in such a small time span of about 2 to 3 weeks. It's not that easy to be able to do it. And when people come to the campaign office, which is currently on the second floor of 1100 Florida Avenue, it's the Rock office, we'll have I pretty much put together a list of about 100 different locations throughout DC. Metro stops, grocery stores, DC government, DMV offices, DC government benefits offices, places that people gather that are DC residents. And there's about over 100 locations. And when you get your petitions, you also get a list of all the great places to go. And if you stand outside, like for example, the Taylor Street Benefits office at 7 in the morning, you have a line of 50 people that are already waiting to get in, that are all DC residents. They might not be registered voters, but that's a potential $150 right there in front of you. Now, an important distinction though is that you can't register someone to vote and then have them sign the petition. The petition actually says that they are qualified electors, and in order to be a qualified elector, you actually have to be registered with the Board of Elections as a voter in the District of Columbia. So you could have a DC ID but not be a registered voter. And if you were to give them a voter registration card, they fill it out, you still have to mail that and have it be processed by the Board of Elections. And the chances of that actually taking place within the 2-week window that we have is very low. So we're not trying to register voters this time
Well, we
around.
will have the information for them to register.
Yeah, we'll have voter registration cards, but it's important to know that you can't have someone fill that out and have them sign the petition and think that it's going to be a valid one. In fact, you're doing them a disservice and yourself a disservice by having them sign because they're not a qualified elector at that time.
So then that really goes to asking the question when you first meet that person. Are you a registered voter?
Number one question is, are you a DC
That's
voter?
the first thing you should be asking.
And a lot of it's reading body language, because people will say, oh yeah, of course I am, and then you ask them a little bit more questions. So did you vote? Where'd you vote at? When was the last election you voted in? Did you vote for in the midterms? You can ask them a follow-up question, and if they look away, people often, you can read their body language that people kind of will look away when they're going to tell a lie. And it's a lot about reading people's body language to know, well, actually, I'm not a registered voter, because they actually feel guilty. And it's not something that we want to like harp on, be like, oh, you're not registered to vote. It's like, oh, maybe next time.
Yeah.
But
And then can we do a mock real quick?
yeah.
One
One
thing
petition.
Is there a script, like a sample?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is, we'll probably have a script. I'm still going to have one last thing to give out to folks when we get the petitions. So the way the petitions work themselves is that the campaign will control the petitions in the respect that we get a final version. This is a petition. Eric right here is actually the chairman of Ballot Initiative 78, which is a ballot initiative to
Legalize limited access, registration of dirt bikes, ATVs, and UTVs for limited use, for dirt bikes and ATVs, and for registration only for UTVs, which are buggies and and this is to stop and quell the issues that we have around police interactions and also around just transportation in general. So people are talking about doing, and I don't want to get too long into it, but people are talking about doing a park. So say we put a park at RFK, then it's still a misdemeanor to travel to RFK. And you're asking people from low-income neighborhoods to get a U-Haul or a truck to move from Benning Road to RFK. So you still need some type of legal framework for people to move for 3 miles without being subject to arrest and seizure.
So,
Murder.
this is his petition. We haven't got our petitions. We anticipate getting our petitions next week. But the petition is pretty cut and dry. When you look at it, you probably can't see it very well here, but it has a short title, the summary statement. This first box right here, this is what the Board of Elections right now has published, and we have to wait 10 days before it's been deemed approved. Below that is you have these boxes, and on the back side you have, altogether on each petition there's 20 different boxes. The most important part of the petition, the one thing that we can't do as a petition circulator, there's one thing that we can't do on this. The very one thing is the signature. You can write everything else in here. So on this, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes. You have a signature box, an address box, a printed name box, date sign, and the ward they live in. The one thing that you can't do is their signature. You can write in every single part of the petition but their signature.
I just want to make a point to what you just said. it's a really an excellent idea for you, the signature collector, to write. Don't let them write it because it won't be legible. Make sure, they say, oh, I'll write it. No, ma'am, with all due respect, let me write it in for you. I just need you to sign. That way you're controlling the legibility of the information, and I find that to be very beneficial, and then let them sign it.
That works for some folks. Some folks that are trying to do more volume, it actually takes more time to do it that way. The most important thing though is actually when I've done it, is I let the person sign and do it all, and then I take it and I read it back to them. I'm like, okay, John Q. voter, and you live at 123 North Capitol Street. Is that an apartment or a house?
That's a good idea.
And you read it back to them as if you are having to deal with his team, because Eric's team is going to be the people that they're going to get copies of every single petition, and they're going to go through and check each box to see, all right, does John Q. voter live at 1234 North Capitol Street, apartment 5? And they'll type that in, hit enter, and they'll say, yes, that is a registered voter right there. And then they'll be able to go to the next one. We'll have the entire, each petition box is numbered, each petition themselves is going to be numbered, and what the campaign will do is actually number the petitions, so when we hand them out, we know that Maurice has petition 105 to 110. And so if there's a bunch of photocopies made, it prevents fraud from being able to happen, is that we actually control the number of petitions that are out there, and we know who has which petition. So if there's a random petition that's found sitting on the sidewalk, be like, oh, number 105, that was Maurice's petition, let's give it back to him. The other part about the petition, we'll go over this part, this is the nuts and bolts of it really, but we'll go over it when we actually have petitions, is that at the very end you fill out this part and then sign it and date it when the petition's completely full. Now, if some person is has chicken scratch handwriting, you can't read it, and what you do is you then will fill it out for them, and you just cross it out. There's no penalty for crossing out bad or improper signatures, or someone signs it, they're like, oh yes, for Washington, Maryland, and they can't sign it if they live in Virginia or Maryland. It's only DC registered voters, which makes it a lot harder than any other state in the United States. If you go within 10 miles in any direction, you're still in that state. In the District of Columbia, you go 10 different miles, you're out in another state, which makes it a lot more difficult.
Follow-up question. When I was collecting signatures for candidates, and then those signatures come in, other candidates who are competing would challenge the signatures.
Yes.
Is there anybody in this scenario, obviously there are no candidates, but are there people who will challenge?
Yes.
That's what this process is for, so that they'll challenge will be in vain.
Yeah.
So then we will then counter-challenge and say, no, these are
The
legit.
Restaurant Association is going to challenge it.
So that's why we have a verification team. What we could do, under the DC Board of Elections law, it used to be up until 71, went through, they changed the regulations during 71, you used to be able to submit as many signatures as you wanted. Like, here's a stack, overwhelm the Board of Elections, and let them take a sampling out and prove that there's some sort of fraud. Now, the campaign can turn in no more than twice the number of required signatures.
Which
So
goes
there's,
back to the validity side.
yeah, it goes back to the validity part of it.
So if you're running below 50, your campaign is going to fail. Well, it's not failing, but you need to do massive amounts of editing. You just have to edit out half of the work you've done. Scratch out, because it's going to drive you back towards that number I was telling you about, right?
And so it's also good to maximize as many signatures, because then that'll be a disincentive for the restaurant board to say, because if it's just a close margin, they say, oh, we can challenge them 500, that'll knock them out the box. But if we're very efficient and have a lot, that'll let them know that.
And it also prevents the campaign from spending money it doesn't need to spend. If we have a verification team that's keeping count, and we know at the end of the week we've got 24,500, we only need a few hundred more left, we can pull back some of the signature collectors off the streets and start saving money. Because if all of a sudden we turn around with 40,000 valid signatures, well, we still have to pay those people 40,000 valid signatures. So what the campaign's actually going to be doing, when we did previous efforts, it would be turn-in was once a week. So you get paid on Monday, you come back the following Monday, turn in your signatures, get paid, come back again on Mondays. Now it's going to be every other day you turn in your petitions, unless you have a prearranged agreement with one of the petition circulator captains. But you'll still get paid Monday to Monday. And what Eric's team does is they basically get the stacks, They sit around a table and they go through, verify everything, and then they will be able to have on Sunday a list of how many valids, invalids for each petition circulator, and then be able to have a printout that shows these are the petition pages, these are the number of valid, these are the number of invalid. Please write the check out for this much amount of money, and then we put it into the folder that has your information in it. So we have a running tally. So at the end of the year, when you're getting, this is a contractor job, so you'd be actually receiving a 1099 for miscellaneous income. Especially if you're paid during this year, you're going to get the 1099 sometime in January or February of next year. And you should have put aside a little bit of cash in order to make sure that you don't have a large tax liability, because 1099s, you're not taxed on that cash.
So I'm walking out of Dunkin' Donuts.
Hey, are you a registered voter?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to sign a petition to overturn the DC Council's repeal of Initiative 77?
Absolutely.
All right, so what I need you to do here is put your signature in this box, your address in this box, print your name here, the date, and what ward you're in. If you don't know the ward, I can fill it in for you later on.
Okay, thank you.
Should you say registered voter in DC?
Yes, actually, that's probably the best question. Are you a registered voter? I like to say in the District of Columbia instead of saying DC. It just, but sometimes I use more words. People can actually hear you a little bit better than DC or EC, or they don't always get it.
And so, for me as a signature provider, I would just sign generally.
No, I would actually have you fill the whole thing out.
Okay.
But the one thing that happens often is people will flip the boxes around. They'll sign in the signature, or they'll sign in the address box and put the signature in the
Right.
in the address. And you actually, if that happens, you tell them, "Oh, I'm sorry, I think you did it wrong. In order for your signature to count, I'm going to need you to do this all over again for me. It'll only take a couple seconds."
Okay, because you have to sign in.
It has to be in the right boxes. Because if you do in the wrong box, they can throw that. They can throw that out.
And I would want to do as the least amount of work as possible, so I would probably just give you my address and write it in. Is that fine?
I mean, that's totally fine. I found that it's easier because people sometimes don't want to tell you out loud
yeah,
what their address is. It's just a lot easier if they can just write it in. You don't have to put the zip code. It's just Washington, D.C. It's for us to be able to check the Board of Elections. There's 499,000 registered voters in the District of Columbia. So as long as we can find out if that's an apartment, if it's a, what unit number it is, that's really important because sometimes there's two John Smiths in the same building and all of a sudden there's some question of whether that is the right person that was signing that
So
petition.
we do need the apartment number, unit number?
Yes, if you can, so one of the things that I generally ask in the follow through is I always read it back to the person. Never just move on. And also now you can technically have 2 clipboards. You can have 4 clipboards. And as long as you see the person signing it,
You roll.
yeah, I mean, we had a guy that was rocking 4 clipboards at once, and he was turning over 1,200 a week, 1,200 valid signatures. I mean, that's $2,400 he just made that week, like that. And then it was him holding 4 clipboards at a metro station, keeping an eye and talking. He was a tall guy, so he could always see everyone. And that's doable. I mean, this is a hustle. You have to be on your feet. You have to be talking to people. If you expect people to come to you, you're not going to actually be wasting your time. And as far as the time goes, we don't want to pay people under minimum wage. This is about raising the wage to one fair wage. So there's a certain dynamic of if you're not working very hard, it will show, and it will also show on your pay scale. So we have 2 tiers of pay scale. We have a Tier 1, which is part-time we consider it, which is if you were to do, each one of these is 20 signatures on each petition, right? If you have under 10 of these that are all 100% valid, let's say you turn in 15, but you have a validity rate of about 75%, then you're going to have under 200. If you have under 200 during the week, you get paid only $2 per valid signature. Which is not very much, but if you did 7 in 1 hour, let's put it differently, okay? If you had 7 valid signatures in 1 hour, that's $14. Now, if you were working on, if you turn in more than 200 valid signatures in 1 week, then it knocks you up to $325 per signature. And then if you get 250, then you get a $100 bonus, which knocks that up to about $350 a signature. So it's potentially very lucrative. I mean, in that same 1 hour of getting 7, you just made yourself over $22 at the $3.25 pay scale. And then it'll go up during the second week to 25 more cents. Because as it goes, it becomes harder for people to find people that haven't signed. So we incentivize, we increase the pay per signature on the second week. and going forward.
What do you come across a registered voter that don't know about the initiative?
Well, we're gonna have flyers for you to be able to hand out, because some people be like, I need to educate myself, I'm not gonna sign in unless I've read about it. And that's an okay thing. I mean, we want people to be comfortable signing and not pressured. Be like, no, sign this, you need to sign this, no. It's important that people feel that they know what they're signing. So we're gonna have some flyers to hand out, we'll have giant buttons that say sign the petition. And the people that have the big buttons, that's like our way of saying you're an official signature collector. We'll have the back sides of them with graphics on it that says DC voters sign here. But when you also, I think we're gonna have the most people that are like, no, I don't like this, I don't want to deal with this. I've talked to too many people that are against it. And you can basically, if you have a good grasp of what the sub-minimum wage is, that's tied, its history comes from slavery, that we as a society should not treat workers any differently depending on what their industry. And that to me, I try using the word unethical, that the two-tier minimum wage system is unethical. That it's unethical to pay people less for the same work at the end of the day. I mean, all work is work. Depending on what you're doing, a gratuity should not be a form of wage. So what the tipped credit is the idea, and this is really the nuts and bolts of what 77 is about, is what the tip credit is, and the fact that 77 will ultimately do away with the two-tiered minimum wage system. So let's say I work at a restaurant and it's a rainy night, very few people show up, I get $25 in tips that night. Right now, the prevailing sub-minimum wage is $3.89 an hour, okay? Now, all restaurant owners are required to have to pay the tip credit or the tip penalty, however you want to frame it. The tip penalty or the tip credit requires the employer to knock the employee's wages up to the prevailing minimum wage. Currently, the District of Columbia is $13.25. So if I work 5 hours at $3.89 an hour, and then I got $25 in tips, I would probably make around $61. And the employer would actually have to pay $4 extra per hour for me to be there to have my small income that I made match this prevailing minimum wage. What 77 would do would be get rid of that tip credit entirely. And if you work those 5 hours, it will ultimately be by $15 now, you make $75 plus the $25 in tip, you made $100. The tip credit basically allows restaurants to pay their employees less and use the gratuity in the tip as a form of wage, when it's not. It's actually 100% based on the customer's wins. They want to give you $100.
Right, yeah.
I mean, as a server, I got stiffed to the tune of thousands of dollars by Europeans. They just, that's the culture. They don't tip in their culture, and here they are in our culture, and we kind of hope that they tip, and that really shows the fallacy of the sub-minimum wage system that we have, that it is unethical for us to be able to allow owners of restaurants to be able to pay their workers less. I mean, in California, which is the largest state in the country, they don't have a sub-minimum wage. So all the people in the restaurant industry there get a full minimum wage plus tips on top, and that's what this is all about.
You broke that down nicely.
Just a quick question. When you are out and you're collecting signatures, do you think it's kind of a waste of time to really get into 77 when really what we should be doing is exactly what Reverend said? You have to talk to people about it. You've got a short period of time to deal with this.
Yep.
And the thing that I think that most people will agree is that the council had no right to take the vote of the people and say it doesn't count. So I think if you spend the time, instead of talking about 77, in some cases you're going to have to, but largely, I think your time should be spent on talking about the fact that DC has a city council and it was voted in, and it's supposed to do the will of the people.
Right. And we'll have a flyer. There's also the nice component of just being like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have time to be able to talk to you about this. Here's a flyer, should answer most of your questions. And if you have more questions, go to the website.
Yeah.
And then you're like on to the next person. Because there are already some times where it's slow and there's no one around, you can actually spend that time to engage with the person. Otherwise, you kind of want to be quick and curt.
Help us save our vote and mumble sauce.
Yeah, that is the common ground. The common ground for, no matter which side of the initiative you're on, the common ground is the sanctity of the vote. And I don't think that those individuals who voted for it or against it, they cannot disagree with that. My vote should be respected and counted.
And
I think
the no vote was disrespectful too. It It was.
And
What'd you
some
say,
people
Eric?
what we told them in the past is like, oh, you're against it? Well, you know what? You'll be able to vote against it when you vote on it. This is just to be able to give voters the last say. That's what, I mean, in a large sense, this entire referendum is framing it that we are giving the voters the final say on this matter. We voted once, DC Council had their arms turned, but we're gonna get the final say on it. And if you don't agree with it, you can still sign and vote against it later on, because ultimately you're trying to like spin it back to them.
Because that's a
signing the
stronger
petition.
value proposition that you were saying, that my vote is sacred. It doesn't matter what it's about.
Right. Exactly.
The other thing that the Reverend said was when the council repealed in the past, it's always been in their interest and not ours. So I think maybe some of the literature that we give them speaks to the fact that these people have repealed in their own self-interest.
And it'll be something that they'll come back to later, and they'll try to champion. You know what I mean? So like, since we've been here today, what were we talking about? Getting big money out of politics. Now they're championing that. They're championing that. But before they were stopping the referendum, so when it's in their interest, they'll just like they stole the shine on 76 and champion minimum wage in the beginning. Like that's part of the MO.
Is there a social media component to this, like getting people to say that they're supporting us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anything like that? Because
I mean, I would say it's there, but it's not a concerted effort to say I'm supporting, because at the end of the day, it's only this. You can tweet and like all you want, but unless you're actually involved in this part of the game, then it's like it's collectivism instead of activism. And we want people to actually show up and sign. So a lot of it, what the social media component's been about is getting them to the website, getting them to fill out the form online so that they're interested in actually helping. I found that too many times in the past that we've gotten people to click more. It's really about showing up. And showing up is half the battle for anything.
Because it's really true, because you can get like so much engagement online that does not convert into action. You know what I mean? People can be DMing you all day, be tweeting you all day. I'm with you, bro. I'm with you. Rah, rah, rah. I don't have
Since we have such a compressed time period.
You can tweet out,
sign.
you can tweet out, meet me at 4 o'clock, such and such a place to sign my petition. That's what you can do, right?
And what we need to do is for all of us to work in our networks to get people out to events like this, to come out. Well, they'll be going out to the Rock office, 1100 Florida Avenue, to be petition collectors. We have to drive the folks to become a petition collector so that we have enough bodies out there on the street actually getting the signatures that we need. That's how we can utilize and mobilize social media in that effort to reach out to our networks. Go to 1100 Florida Avenue, get trained up, sign all the paperwork. Let's get you out there on the street, earn some money for yourself, and do something good to fight for your rights.
Volunteers don't have to fill out any forms.
So a volunteer, regardless, if they live in the District of Columbia, they don't have to fill out any forms, no. We still want to have a file folder of that person, so we have their name, phone number, contact information. Because when we sign out the petitions to those volunteers, we still want to we're going to give them a clipboard, we want the clipboard back, we want the petitions back, so there's still a basic level of intake for volunteers or paid petition circulators. And more about is just accountability. But the number one thing that I'll keep saying back is if the person lives in Maryland or Virginia or anywhere outside the District of Columbia, the very first place they have to go is the Board of Elections, 1015 Half Street, Southeast, Suite 750. And they'll fill out a quick form and they'll bring the yellow carbon copy with them to the campaign office, and we'll put that into a folder. One of the reasons why we do that is if they try to challenge our signatures, say, oh, this person never registered, we can be like, well, actually, we have their original verification document to say that they're an out-of-state petition circulator, so it covers our butt.
I'd like to make a suggestion that people who, everybody's not going to come and volunteer, everybody's not going to come and try to earn a little extra money, because most people are working 2 and 3 jobs, at least in my industry. I'm in the hospitality industry, a lot of people work 2 and 3 jobs and just don't have time. So I would suggest that maybe what we might want to do with those people is have them share this information with their coworkers, their church members, their schoolmates, whatever. Wherever they have people in terms of, like you said, social media, even on social media. But you have to let them know that it is important that those who are registered voters in the District of Columbia sign these petitions. And you have to let them know that it's a short window in terms of doing it. and that, and we need them to be involved in that regard. Also that they, you know, it's just a, I had it right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, forgot it. Just that quick, sorry.
So,
But anyway, get people to, you know, get people to see the importance of doing this in a quick turn time.
And you brought up your congregation. So
Yes.
if you had a couple clipboards right before the service is over and you're standing at the exit, you can make a killing.
Well, what about
Because you know they're DC residents pretty much.
Right, I mean, you
Get the
assume
pastor
that
to announce it.
Hmm?
Get the pastor to
the
announce it.
pastor announces, ask the pastor, hey, by the way,
Come to the back of the church at the end of the service.
What about senior citizens' homes? Because I mean, if you go to, a lot of the senior citizen homes have a lot of people in them.
So those are great places. Because usually, I mean, senior citizens are usually all registered to vote. The hard part about that, my experience, is getting into the senior citizens
That's what I
home.
was asking.
So if you know someone there and are friends with someone there, then have them invite you over and actually try to have them organize some sort of event in the senior citizens home. Because to get inside of it is actually, they don't want you in there. With all due respect, they don't want people that are outsiders inside of that space. And it's just a security thing and it's understanding.
Hello, in reference to senior citizens, they have senior citizen centers in every ward. I would plug into the senior citizen center and try to get those people to go into their building. And that way you won't have to, the problem going into their
And you're
building.
right, 'cause largely also they're super voters, so
Yes.
you got a high
Yes.
degree of
Yes.
folks who are actually registered.
Right. I have another question, if I may. I apologize for being tardy, I might have missed this, but the question is, when we're successful at this, is it possible for the council to overturn this, or is?
They got, on a referendum, they gotta live with it for 365 days.
Okay.
Right, they can't touch it, can't modify it, can't touch it, they gotta live with it. Now, they can do something after that, but at that point, that's political suicide,
Right.
right? I mean, so, you know, I mean, the thing is, that's why they wanted to prevent it from getting enacted in the first place, because then they wouldn't have to go back and do something that was gonna expose themselves. And so again, and see, also the other thing about this is that if you qualify to get on the ballot, you automatically, by getting on the ballot, stop the repeal of the city council. So now the city council is rolled back, because now it has to wait for people to vote it, since they were originally voted it, and the city council repealed it. The fact is to get it on the ballot basically puts a stop to the city council's repeal until a decision is made by the population.
What happens during that time in terms of the monies?
It goes into, Initiative 77 goes into effect.
It's already in effect, actually. 77 became law October 11th. So what they did, just for the kind of the mechanics of it, is when we have a ballot initiative and it's voted on, it's immediately, after it's been voted and certified, it's transferred immediately to Congress for the 30 legislative review days. 77 was transferred in July, review expired in October. The DC Council passed temporary legislation and emergency legislation to stop 77. But in order to actually repeal it, they have to finalize an actual law. And so they had a hearing about that in September, and then they voted on that law on October 16th. It went to the mayor's office, the mayor signed it on the 24th of October, and then the chairman transferred it to Congress on the 30th. And so, what was I going with that? I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, with the Democratic Congress that's
Right.
coming in,
Mhm.
and I work with the bill, so I know that we get the legislative calendar. I know that they don't have a whole lot of days in between now and the first of the year.
So it was an interesting thing that what the chairman did, actually. Normally the chairman will sit on all legislation that's passed by the DC Council, usually October, November, and December, and they sit on it because they realize that at the end of a congressional cycle that they'll have to resubmit that law if it doesn't get through the 30 legislative days. So I believe once the chairman saw the news articles that we were doing a referendum campaign, he opted to just transfer it to Congress to start the clock. I don't know if there was a calculated decision or if it was a mistake. I'd like to believe that he just was trying to have us run our wheels and see what would happen. He also can potentially make a good standard argument because the way the referendum law has to be transferred to Congress, oh well, there's never been a referendum in process at the end of a congressional cycle. So there's actually a question that will come out of this is, do those signatures that we're collecting, are they potentially invalidated because the chairman might have to resubmit the law in January? All of our legal analysis says that there's no reason for the signatures to be invalidated because it's the same law. It's not changing, nothing's changed in that whole entire process. So which is potentially gives us more time. Congress is supposed to actually adjourn on December 14th.
But Congress comes back in session. They're not in session right now.
So they still do a pro forma session that happens every 3 days. So someone comes in, they gavel, and then they say we're adjourned. So every 3 days, you can go to congress.gov/days-in-session, and it tells you exactly how many days Congress has been. So they generally gavel on Tuesdays and Fridays. And so because of old archaic rules, Congress can't go out of session for more than 3 days without the other body, or both bodies have to agree for a recess. So they just gavel every 3 days.
So how many days has that been?
We've already had 9 days go through.
9 days.
I believe a little bit over 9 days. But those are legislative days. So the big considerations that we have to deal with going forward in the next 3 weeks or so is if Chairman McConnell, I'm not sure Chairman McConnell, Senate Majority Leader McConnell decides that he wants to pack the federal judges because he's in charge of making sure the federal judges are affiliated with his ideology. So he might want to keep Congress in session longer. Congress is still operating on a continuing resolution in order to keep it funded. Officially, the calendar started October 2019, fiscal year started October 1st. Well, only I think 5 of the different bills have been passed for the budget, meaning that there's still going to be a fair amount of time that they have to do some horse trading to get the budget finalized. But that could mean that they could keep staying in session all the way up until Christmas. I mean, the Home Rule Act was passed, like, I believe, the 23rd or the 24th of December in 1973 or 4. So if Congress stays in session, then we have to be done by the day before the 30th legislative review day. So we actually have 29 days. The way the law is written, we have 29. We have to turn it in 5 p.m. on the day before it's supposed to become law. And once we submit those and they've been certified, the Board of Elections is supposed to send notice to Congress to stop the legislative review, put it on pause, and then once it's certified, then we have a vote within 114 days.
Couple things. I was thinking too that they may extend Congress because of the budget resolution too. I was thinking that too. I wonder how that would affect us. Also, the problem we had with previous referendums was them accepting the language in the referendum. So, are we really on board with that? And my last question is, I know we have a short window, but is there a process, do we have a process where we will have a process of validating the signatures we get so we know that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So Eric's sitting over here, you were a little bit late. So Eric is our head validator. He validated the signatures on Initiative 71, he validated the signatures on 76 and on 77. And so he's one of the best in the District of
And
Columbia.
actually putting together, got a whole team operating on that, right?
Yeah,
Right.
So,
Right. And you know what, I think one of the things is, let me emphasize it because we can get to the nuts and bolts, but it's about people, getting people out there to collect, right? That's really what it's about at this juncture of the game. Because the more people we got in the street hitting vitally populated areas, the better chance we got in terms of hitting the number that we need to hit to get on the ballot. And that means that people got to work their networks. People got to work their network. It's okay, and it's good that you're here, but also everybody's got a network of some kind, right? So it's a matter of also working that network that you have. I always point out this story because it's always interesting to me. I sort of teach community organizing sometimes from a biblical perspective. But there's this whole text where Jesus sends folk out 2 by 2, right? And he tells them to take nothing with them on the road and don't even talk to anybody on the road. Y'all remember that text? Yeah. Right? It's clandestine, right? He says when you get to the town, share the password. The password don't come back to you, shake the dust of that town off your feet, right? Because what they share is a password. Because I know that because it says something very interesting. It says, but if it comes back to you, stay in that house, do not move from house to house. Eat what is set before you. So you got to ask the question, how do you organize not moving from house to house? Well, they've tapped into folk that got networks of power. So they don't need to move from house to house. The people that are there in that town are gathering up the sort of mechanisms that you need in order to begin to create and concentrate your power. And so that's a part of what we got to do here today, is sort of look at the networks that we have to be able to concentrate our power. Because there's always somebody in the midst of our friendship, in the midst of our community that knows everybody. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? My mother was one of those folks who knew everybody, right? I go to my mother for anybody in Baltimore. She could tell me anybody in Baltimore, right, what they did. But everybody knows somebody like that. That's who we got to employ and enlist. And so it's also good that you're here, but we also got to begin to employ that to sort of take it further and create the strength. That's why we got over 100 folks right now who are signed up, and we're signing up every day. We're going to need the labor unions.
Yeah.
You know, they got to get that vision and get onto this. And you know, the labor unions, Liz, I'm saying this, is caught in this discussion on Initiative 77. That's where they're caught up at. And it's far beyond Initiative 77 at this point, right? It is about the vote. That's why Bert and them turned out from Local 23, right? Local 23 had been a part of the coalition, but not really engaged, but now Local 23 is engaged,
Yes.
right? Because Local 23 said, hold it, this is about the vote. That means that anything that we bring forward, these folks can overturn. We bring forth worker issues, they can overturn it because it gives them heartburn, right? And you know, that's really what it's boiling down to. And so folks got to realize that vision, because one of the things that's set up in home rule, they kept those mechanisms in place because they wanted to make sure that the city council were overseers on the plantation. That when things were voted through that upset the business community, we can simply overturn them. Upset any of the other kinds of economic or political entities, you can simply overturn them. That's why it was designed in that way. That's why it was set up in that way. To make sure that everybody who got elected actually were able to operate as an overseer on the plantation, and if there were any Nat Turners, to be able to deal with them. And so this is what this battle's about right now. When we talk about sort of repealing the city council's repeal, it's to sort of say that the days of being overseers on the plantation are over, that people are awake and we are aware in terms of what's been going on, what's been happening, and we demand that there be accountability to the people. People, when they vote, those votes got to be respected. Those votes have got to be made sacred and held as sacred. Because it makes no sense for us to be talking about, like I said, voter suppression anywhere else, or even talking about statehood.
That's right.
How in the world are you going to talk about statehood and overturn your own votes? You can't do it.
Yeah.
It's hypocritical,
It is.
contradictory, right? You can't talk about make us a state. And on the other hand, we turn around and say, but Maurice, I'm sorry, but your vote don't count because you voted the wrong way.
See, right out in front of that building, they got that big sign out there. When you go up to the
Right.
to city council, big sign up there talking about no representation and all this and everything. Come on, yeah,
Right.
I said appropriate, no representation.
So you got to be the first one to protect those ideals and to really assert that those ideals, you really mean them, right? You just can't sort of arbitrarily throw them out when it's inconvenient. So that's what this is really about. And so I think there's a lot of passion here because what we hear all the time is and I'll tell you a story. One of the people that stood out with us at the press conference when we announced the referendum was Terry Lynch. I don't know if you know Terry Lynch. Terry Lynch is the executive director of the Downtown Cluster of Congregations. Terry Lynch was opposed to Initiative 77. So he voted against Initiative 77. But he was out there because he was more infuriated that they would wipe away the votes. And so he was saying, sign me up. Because it's far beyond that now. It has to do with voting. It has to do with the respect of the vote. So that's what we're dealing with. So that's why we got to continue to expand these efforts and get some passion up, get into those places of influence that we know exist out there, the church, the Masons, the fraternity, the sorority, labor unions, activist groups, all across the board. We gotta activate them and mobilize them. Sorry.
Just to follow up real fast with this, you brought up about the legislative text. This is actually really short, it's one sentence. In the tip minimum wage fairness act that the council passed in October, section 2 says, blah, 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 ballot initiative 77 is hereby repealed. And what we're doing is basically putting a line through that one piece of the law, and that's it. There's no major changes, we're just basically striking that. And the voters are gonna be asked the question of yes or no. And the yes will be to strike that, and the no will be to accept the DC Council's repeal. And it's pretty straightforward. It's not very much legislative text, since it's just a sentence. So we don't anticipate like a challenge to be a very good challenge if someone tries to challenge the legislative text because it's so simple. We brought up earlier about the senior centers. I'll be honest, that's a blind spot in my life. I don't spend very much time in those places, but if we can actually have a petition circulator that is a senior, go to each one of the senior centers every single day of the week, have them out there, we can clean up.
I want
We
to
can
say
do really well.
I want to say something about that. I worked on a campaign with James Butler, who ran for mayor, and I also worked on a campaign both as chief strategist for John Cheeks, who ran against Eleanor Holmes Norton. So those two guys have infrastructure already plugged into the senior center homes, particularly James Butler. So I'm going to hit him as my network, so we can get in there, and that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'll take that as an action item to talk to whomever I need to talk to if I need to talk to.
John Cheeks, we're waiting on him.
No, I'm gonna follow up
Cheeks
on
needs
you,
to get out too.
You know about John Cheeks?
Yeah, I said, yeah, I know him.
Okay.
So he needs to get out too.
Yeah,
So
he's my brother-in-law. I'll make sure
Okay,
he get out
all
there.
right, good.
Those of us who are planning on actually collecting signatures, before you leave, Eric's got a computer over here. We need you to put basically your contact information in the system so we can follow up. Also to fill out a couple of the personnel policies and code of conduct and the W-9. If you haven't done that yet, please do
Can
that
we fill
now.
those out?
Eric, you got mine, right?
After we get,
You got mine.
so the board of elections to get the,
I mean, you can do it now. I mean, since we're meeting right here, I'd say get it out of the way now. But before you can actually get petitions from the campaign and you live outside of DC, you'll have to come back from the Board of Elections. So I can start the file folder for you now with that information, but in order to actually get the clipboard hit the streets, you're going to actually have to have that proof of an outstanding.
Okay, I have a question. So, because we haven't received the petitions yet, would we get any credit for the 9 legislative days that have passed so far? So we really have 20 days.
Yeah, the referendum process is on paper to say that, yes, you actually have a referendum. In fact, the referendum and initiative process was voted on by the people. That when the Home Rule Act was first passed, it didn't include that component to it. And I believe it was 78 that the DC voters voted and ratified the ability for us to have a referendum. The council what I read at that time, didn't even want to be able to put the referendum process in there because it's designed, I mean, there's also a recall process, there's an initiative process, and there's a referendum process. But the referendum process is by far the most difficult by design. It's designed to say, yeah, you can do that, you can overturn our law, but good luck. And the real factor is if there's enough people that care about it and you have an army of petition circulators, it's doable.
Right.
And we're going to make history together. And that's really the important thing, to know that being a part of this is we're actually going to be changing the game. And we have to reach out to our networks. Because if we don't, all of us talk to 5 to 10 people after today, then we're not going to be doing as much as we could be. Because the best thing we can do next week is hit the ground running. Not try to run back around and circle back and try to find people. It's like, no, we have everyone ready to go. And we're just handing out petitions and hitting the city.
Dates that are ahead of us, is there a piece on Monday?
So Monday we're doing training at the Rock office, do more intake. Basically,
What time?
I believe 3 at 9 p.m. at the Rock office, 1100 Florida Avenue, 2nd floor.
And the training is for, I'm sorry.
It's basically kind of what we're doing right here. It's
Okay.
more about best practices, going over like the
Send
petition
anybody to there, send anybody.
and do the intake. It gives people the opportunity to go to the Board of Elections, have their file started. So when we do have petitions, I mean, ideally we're supposed to get them on Tuesday. If someone challenges the Board of Elections title, short summary, and legislative text, then that can be delayed another couple more days. And if that happens, then we just want to be able to hit the ground running. So we go to the Board of Elections, they give us the petition, we run to a copy or start making copies, start numbering the petitions, and boom, 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 hand them out so people are going to be able to flood the city.
And how do we get petitions once they're made available?
You're going to be coming to the campaign
Oh,
office.
campaign office, okay.
So we have to, in order to prevent fraud's an important thing. We just saw what happened during the last election cycle. And that fraud can happen in a lot of different ways. I mean, as what Eric's going to be working on is making sure that we don't have fraud, that we run a clean campaign, and that people are paid for their signatures that they collect. So, I mean, any of us can go to the Board of Elections and buy a CD-ROM from them with every single registered voter's information on it. And we can sit in a circle and just pass petitions and each person sign that. And that's fraud, and people have done that before. And the only way that you can actually prevent that type of fraud is you have to go down to the Board of Elections and you have to look at John Q. Voter's signature and check it against their machines that they have at the Board of Elections. And otherwise, people can do it really, loosely. And we don't want any sort of fraud to happen. So we actually, when you register and come in, you get a folder we're gonna keep a folder of your information. Basically, I'm gonna ask for your ID. I'm gonna take a photograph of your driver's license and write down on that piece of paper your phone number. Have you fill out the W-9 and code of conduct, and that goes into a folder with your name on it. And we keep that there at the campaign office until the campaign's over. And so if there's any question or we're not sure where you're at, we can open up that folder and have your phone number. We're also, after that part is, here's this petition, you're going to have a number on each of your petitions that you're going to get a certain number of petitions. So when you come back in, you're like, oh yeah, we know that you have number 105 to 110. And that way, because each petition is going to be numbered on the paper itself, if someone goes to Kinko's and decide to print up 1,000 copies of it, it's all going to have that same number on it, and we're going to be like, there's something wrong right here.
And you have to sign each page and date it.
Exactly. And I mean, so the training part of it is actually going over the minutia of the petition itself, because there's some information. There's actually, I mean, the petition is a legal document at the end of the day. You can, if you lie on this, you can go, it says under perjury, penalty of perjury, it says that upon conviction thereof be fined up to $10,000 or imprisoned up to 1 year. I mean, if you lie and conduct fraud on this, it can haunt you. But if you do it right and you run a clean campaign, it doesn't matter. It's all that matters that you are doing it to the best of your ability. You're signing it and you're handing it into the campaign every other
And the
day.
people that are challenging will not only say your signatures are invalid, they'll throw some saying and say you deliberately. They will make accusations against you, so you have to come correct.
Exactly. You have to do it by the book to the T, and that way we're above any sort of reproach. Exactly.
So how many petitions am I getting?
It depends on how many you think you can get.
Okay.
A lot of it is we're going to ask people when they show up if they plan on doing it full time or not, because there's essentially 3 different categories. There's volunteer, which you're doing it out of love and the fact that you care about the issue, and the volunteers, we are kind of having a slight more hands-off approach because it's on your time. There's less accountability in that end. So I anticipate the volunteers probably want to turn theirs in, when it's convenient to them, as opposed to we need you to turn it in every other day. The other two categories would be the part-time and the full-time, and that's only based on the number of valid signatures that you turn in. Because when I was working on 71, I would stand outside the metro and have people sign, and then as a person signed, be like, I've already signed this 3 times. Yeah. And they're excited about the issue. But what that does is that lowers your overall validity. And we want people to have when I say high validity, that means that petition circulator's signature, address, date, ward is all perfect. So when Eric's team's going through it, your petitions, you are shooting for above 50%. If you're going 35% or lower, meaning that of these 20, only less than 4 of them or 5 of them are actually good, you're wasting your time as much as you are wasting the campaign's time. And if it's actually done improperly, then you're taking that person's out from the system. Because if they filled it, think that they did it right, but they actually did it wrong, and someone later comes up to them and be like, did you sign this? Like, oh, I already signed it. But they actually did it wrong, and so it's a double whammy there. But as far as the numbers, we'll probably, I think, as a baseline, depends on how, I would put it up between 100 and 200. So each petition is 20. So 5 pages would be 100, 10 pages would be 200. And we don't want to put all those out there just yet. So it would be, I would say, let the person make the decision themselves, and we number it, and then when they leave, we have a record of so-and-so got petitions numbers X through Z, and that way we can keep a control over the number of petitions that are out
And
there.
you can always come get some more.
You can always get more. I mean, we had people accidentally leave their clipboards in the metro, like fell asleep. All of a sudden, I had to do a sob story of, oh, I lost 120 petition or 120 signatures. What can I do? I'm like, do a better job holding yours closer to you. And there's only so much we can do. But because this campaign's on an expedited time frame, we are asking people that are paid to return them every other day. So that way we know exactly where we're at and on the total number, because we have to keep hiring people.
I'm gonna give a tip. One place where you can get signatures is at the Washington Hospital Center. Just sit
Get
at
out of here,
sit
that's
at
where I work at.
sit at the Panera, sit at the Panera.
So that is a great, it might be a great place, but the manager at the Panera, because it's private property, he can say, you know what, you're not allowed to solicit here. So my experience is when you're on private property, you need to talk to the person who's in charge there and say, is it okay if I want to do this? There's a Supreme Court case that actually works in California, Prunier, which goes back to the 80s, but that only deals with California and allows petition circulators to be on strip malls.
Also the DMVs.
The DMVs are great, actually.
I love
and we have to, I'm going to be putting something out when people get the list of good spots to go to, that we'll have a turf agreement. That we have to actually do that. It's important because let's say you're at the DMV. All those people that are in line at the DMV are all DC residents. Same with the courthouse. The courthouse, I would get 100 signatures a day at the courthouse.
One more place, when people pick up their TANF checks at the big chair. That's
The big chair, yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that we're going to have other people that are professional petition circulators. They do this around the country. They go around the country and know in and out how to do it right. And some of those people are going to be up at 5 in the morning at those locations, already ready to go to collect signatures.
Staking out their turf.
Yeah, and now, so we have to have an agreement that if you were at a place and you were planning on going to it, and you see the person with the button, you go up to them and you ask, can I collect the signatures right over here? And if they say no, then you have to actually respect that they were there first. I mean, the courthouse is going to be, we're actually probably going to have a lottery that we just do, because it's one of those things that, like, the courthouse can have 2 people right up front, right in front of those metal pylons. All the jurors that are coming in, they are registered voters.
That's why they're there.
That's why they're there. So you have the nexus of everything. You've got the registered voters as jurors. You have people that are
You have to know the
dealing with
city.
police, and you've got the actual police and legal people. But it's important that we know that we have to be respectful to every other person's time, and that if you show up at a place and someone's already there, you ask them, and if they say yes, it's okay, which they probably won't say that because you're just getting in the way of them collecting their signatures, then you have to be respectful, because there are people that I've heard, not in DC, but in other jurisdictions, that people actually get into verbal shouting matches because they want that space, because it's that coveted turf is, you know.
One was about the Whole Foods at 14th and P right out there.
Right. So the sidewalks are great places. And I actually have that Whole Foods in my list, all the Whole Foods, all the Giants, all those Safeways, all the Aldi's, all the Save-A-Lots, all those offers, single metro station, all the benefits, DC government benefits, all the DMVs. The problem with the M Street DMV, for example, is that it's in a parking lot. It's not on the sidewalk.
And they run you off there.
They will run you off. I mean, but you can still treat the security guard with respect, and sometimes they might not know the law. And they might say that, hey, I'm allowed to be here. I'm a DC resident. I am allowed to petition for redress of grievances. That's in the Constitution. You're going to deny me my constitutional right to collect signatures. I'm not getting in the way of anyone here. And you can, try to stand your ground until the point they say, I'm actually calling the police. See you later. And then you leave. But there are ways to finesse situations.
Everybody good?
Were you gonna make a statement about the?
About what we talked about? Okay. One of the things is that we want to also keep it in a place of a healthy environment for everybody. When I say healthy environment for everybody, some people have been in recovery and do not want to be around smoke, for example. So we got to be respectful of people in the territory. It's not trying to infringe on anybody, but it's also saying that there are people in our communities that come out of different experiences and need to protect themselves and need to protect their own health and their own lives. So hopefully we can abide by that and sort of be respectful of everybody and operate in those types of public environments in such a way that, that we're above reproach, that we are also respectful of all that are coming through the door, and that we make a kind of holistic and healthy environment for everybody. So I just wanted to lift that up. Does it make sense what I'm talking about? Okay, good. And you know, and also the other side of that, and I take it even further, because it's sort of like we need to realize that we are engaged in a political issue, political campaign, and therefore we're going to embrace everybody who wants to embrace it. Everybody who wants to embrace it without exception. You know, I'm always in the church where people say, "Oh, everybody's welcome," and then they add a few little butts and hands and all that. No. You know, as I say in the church, I really mean it. That the church doors are open to everybody. Period. Right? No exceptions, no nipple references, and that's the way we got to function as a campaign as well, because we recognize that our society, our culture, and who we are made up of people from every single walk of life. And so therefore we got to be radically inclusive, embracing of everyone. I think one of the clear things to me in terms of even want to go back to even talk about the sort of the Restaurant Association, I'll never forget Reverend Wanda Thompson, who was there late with me on that night to testify, past 1 a.m. in the morning. But I'll never forget her comment when she looked at the folks who were coming to testify and to sort of overwhelm the city council. Reverend Thompson immediately said, "Boy, they don't look like any restaurant I've been in." Which meant that there was no diversity. There was no, that's what hit her right away. And I looked at it from her comments and I went, "You're right. This doesn't look like it," right? So it showed you that in some way their organizing was very one-dimensional. Because out of all the people of color who work in the restaurants, you didn't see them, right? Out of all the folks who are limited in English or non-English speaking, you didn't see them, right? What you saw was a very sort of monolithic sector of the workforce. Target sector. So we're not like that. We're everybody.
Everybody.
Inclusive, with no exceptions to it. And that's how we sort of begin to paint a kind of radical political picture, right? That we're not cutting off any part of the human family, but we're bringing folk together because we're trying to affect an agenda that's a large agenda, that's a meaningful agenda, that's an agenda that begins to change the old body politic in Washington, D.C. I want to thank everybody for being here.
Can I say this one thing? Another approach that they're going to use to challenge this effort is to create divisions, right? Divisions amongst us. They're going to say that this is an agenda that serves people who are not from here, people who are othered than being here in Washington, D.C. That this fight will be a collection of folks who are not the center folks who will be impacted by this work. And so they're going to come back with a way to divide us. And that means we have to work even harder to make this a more inclusive environment and trying to bring in folks who are generally not engaged in these political actions, in this political process. So this is not just about, well, it's important, it's not just about collecting and securing our rights as voters, but it's also an opportunity to engage communities who are mostly indirectly impacted, that are not a part of this political process yet, and to give them an opportunity to be in this work and having an opportunity to be paid is a very special opportunity. So I want you guys to focus on bringing in DC residents who may be disengaged for one reason or another to be part of this work and say this is also an opportunity to earn some extra income for the holidays and for 2019.
Well, I did want to say the one thing that was about when you said that there weren't many people of color. There was a selective group of people of color that were there. Mainly they were people that it seemed to me, they tried to find people that were angry or people that they could rile up. So they figured that those riled up people would effectively reach us and make us feel like, somehow we were the sellouts, not them. And I think that that's the thing you have to say, all people have their own opinions, we get that, you can have your opinion. You can be in the industry and maybe you work in a fun place, like one of the young ladies said. She said she started working in a bar that she used to frequent. So she was there and they needed some help, so she took the job. And she made a comment that she was fighting this because all the things we were saying were very old. It was old thinking. It wasn't what's going on in the industry right now. When we talk about sexual harassment in the industry, oh no, that doesn't happen. We all know better than that. She talked about how much money they're making because she's in an establishment that's very popular, and they make an awful lot of money. And somehow this whole thing going around about 77 being something that would steal the tips away from the people. And as this gentleman very, very well spoke, said that, the tip has nothing to do with the owner of a restaurant or management. If your patrons come in and they want a tip, they tip. If they don't want a tip, they don't tip.
Yeah,
If they have,
77 doesn't take
yeah.
away, right?
No, it doesn't.
Oh,
It does not.
okay.
And that's the thing.
Oh,
People
okay.
still have that.
They're talking about.
It's really good because she heard that and
Right.
replied, Initiative 77 doesn't take away tip. It doesn't.
And that's the thing.
See that?
They raised their hand, like the business owners, right? They raised their hand to chastise, to penalize, something punitive for us. They said, we're gonna take away the tips. Then they rally behind the opposition of us and say, we're gonna save the tips. Hold on now. How you taking them and saving them?
Yeah.
They work both sides of the argument.
See,
Same.
and that was the whole thing they put out, which was to confuse the issue. That somehow presented as if Initiative 77 was going to outlaw tips. Outlaw, right? And people bought into that. The one thing you really realize is that people really do not study issues. Very often people sort of hear from somebody, and somebody can frame it this way, and I'm gonna run with it because I heard it this way, right? And may not understand anything about really what I've just been advocating for or proponent of. And so that's very important to me. And the thing is, they love to talk, this you pointed out, Maurice, about this national agenda. Right? That there's this national agenda that DC is not interested in. Well, Walmart had a national agenda.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I'm getting at, right? You go, all this stuff, it's sort of like, it's like whose national agenda?
Amazon
Right?
has it.
Amazon.
They do. Yes, they do.
And fair employment is our national agenda,
Yes.
right? As well as our local agenda. There's certain things you can't divide up, right? The fact that somebody should be treated right on the job is something you can't divide up and say, oh, that's a national agenda, so that don't have anything to do with it. It's sort of creating this sort of bifurcated system that you can make these arguments. So the thing is that what it comes down to, like I said, I want to emphasize it again, the vote.
That's
a national
But
Right, that's a national
here's
agenda.
the thing with this last election, when you looked at that, when you looked at Florida and what Florida came down to, and how this man disrespected the person running against him, and how in Texas and in Georgia, and now in Mississippi, and I would love to see Mississippi turn around, but I'm certainly not believing it's gonna happen. But I mean, it just lets you see that people know what's going on, and they don't step up and do what they need to do to make that change. And this is the thing that I respect about everybody in this room. And I know, all of us could use the extra change. I know we could, because I know how we live in it, and I know where we live. It's expensive to live here. But at the same time, I think people are here because they know this stuff has to change. I'm in a church, I would have used another word, but I can't use that word. So. But it has to change, and the only way it's going to change is if we the people, stand up and say enough already. This is just it.
I heard a preacher use that word on Thanksgiving service.
Okay.
In his sermon.
I want to say right now, let me say this. I want to give instant recognition to Eric, Nicholas, and Reverend Hagler, because the three of you know the issues. You've spent the time, and now you're sharing the information and knowledge that you have, and that's what happened. That's what needs to happen in this entire city.
Right.
So the three of you, I'm glad the Lord has put me with everybody in this room, but mainly with you three brothers and this sister and everybody in here, and that brother right there, all right?
Maurice Cook.
So yeah, you got the knowledge, you're sharing it, and like you say, we're gonna make history. And this is a good time to be involved, and we need to get more people involved. But I want to give you all instant recognition, because you deserve instant recognition, so thank you. All of you.
Can I say one last thing? One last thing. The people from Rock are not some carpetbaggers from out of state that's coming in here to do something. Rock is about the real thing. I've been with Rock a long time. Many people have come, many people have gone, and the only reason I'm still here is because I've been in this industry a long time, and I knew change was necessary, and these are the only people. Rock's the only organization I've seen in terms of the hospitality industry in this area that's about the business of making the change that's necessary happen.
Right.
So, I mean, when you hear people say, and you're going to hear people say, Rock is a bad thing, Rock is a bad group, don't affiliate yourself with these people because they're terrible. They're not. They're not the boogeyman.
So was
They're not.
so was SCLC.
Yes.
So already you went to some places, the NAACP coming down here stirring up all this, I mean, that was the same old argument.
Yes.
Same old argument, right?
Yeah.
And you know, that argument hasn't changed, you just put a new,
Status
No
quo.
boogeyman.
Okay?
Status
It's the same one.
I don't understand.
Go ahead, let me go to Liz real quick. Let me go to Liz real quick, if you don't mind.
I just want to get some clarification on the Labor Council's position on this repeal initiative. Because someone came on Monday to the executive board meeting and talked about it, but I got mixed reviews from the response.
Yeah, one of the things is that particularly Elizabeth Falcon has been leading the cry to desert this effort. I'm just putting it out there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? And the reason being is that Elizabeth Falcon felt that Rock did not concentrate on organizing workers and bringing workers out. Rock was engaged in a legislative effort, right? Since this time, Rock has sort of retooled themselves, and there's two separate pieces. One is the campaign around the referendum, and one is down around organizing workers, and Sophie can clearly talk to that. Who's Sophie over there? Sophie, raise your hand. She's quiet in the room. But organizing workers. So that's been part of the criticism. So folks say, oh, you didn't produce the workers. And so now we're not going down this phase with you because you're going to lose this phase.
Really?
Right? And so.
I thought it was just deeper than that, and that helps.
Did I explain that fairly accurately?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And you know, and so there's been different players in it. But also what you realize, and what I realized, because one of the things that when we did our meeting over at the Mediterranean spot, was that I realized that a big part of the groupings that were assembled, and I'm not throwing dispersions at them,
No.
but a lot of them are sort of intellectual types of organizations and groups.
Yes.
And we're not sort of street fighter type of organizations and groups. We're not necessarily people who had constituencies that were on the ground. And it doesn't mean I don't respect those groups. I'm not saying that, but I understand what their limitations are, right? I mean, like Ed Lazier from the Fiscal Policy Center, he said, look, I ain't got nobody on the ground because I can help you in terms of policy stuff, but at this phase, you can call on me, but I don't know what I can do at this phase of the campaign. They had a whole lot of groups like that at the table. And so now we sort of changed that and switched that up a bit. We got, for example, NNU at the table, National Nurses United at the table. You know, we got, like I said, Local 23 at the table. We got DSA at the table.
DSA's at the table.
Right. ISO at the table.
ISO is coming, IWW.
So we got a number of groups that's, and there's more than that, but I'm just sort of popping off the top of my head. Groups we have put together to sort of move it out and move it through it. And of course, we're looking towards labor. Now, be very honest with you, we'll never get John Boardman.
Nope.
Right? Because John Boardman is representing the sector of workers in the hospitality industry that is protected by contractors. Right?
I don't think that's the reason. I think you won't get John Boardman because John Boardman's in the pocket of the council and the mayor.
Oh, that's a part of it. I mean, that's a big part of it,
Huge.
right? And thank you.
Huge.
I mean, so those things are sort of apparent. But then there's other folks like I'm sitting there going because I've made some calls to some of my folks. You know, it's like with 32 BJ, even though it doesn't affect it, because they're in Virginia or Maryland, Virginia and Maryland, it's sort of like, they got all these wheelchair workers that are being subpar paid because they're tip wage employees, though they can't ask for the tips. Right? And so everybody, and a lot of people make the assumption because they see somebody in the wheelchair meeting you at the gate of your Southwest, that they work for Southwest or American or United, when they don't. They work for a vendor that's got them written up as tipped wage employees. And so you got all this group of folks that can't afford to pay rent and are working all day long, right? I mean, one person was sleeping in their car because they had 2-3 shifts in order before they went home and saw the family one day a week. I mean, but they would be affected by this if they were in DC, right? So there's a whole lot of folks that are affected. And as I pointed out, this was that we did some stuff around low-wage workers. Some of you might remember this, that were in federal facilities, being tipped wage employees, such as the McDonald's and all that was located in the Reagan building, because they were written up as tipped wage employees, right? What happened in that case, President Obama finally signed an executive order that said that anybody who worked in a federal facility would have to pay one wage, and sort of wiped out the classification with which people were getting around paying people even the minimum, right? I mean, so all those types of things are present and are ripe with corruption. And that's part of what this means, is you sort of change the scenario and say, hold it, one standard, ain't no all this calculation, you don't have to be a mathematician to figure it out or an economist to figure it out, just something. And that for a way, everybody gets more protected. So that's really what we're sort of trying to do on this. You got any questions before you go?
No, sir.
All right.
Did this brother have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to say back when we were talking about getting people involved, people not standing up and stuff. And with this, with referendum, getting people to sign and participate, is you have to find a way to make it personal for them. You know, and show how it directly or indirectly affects them. Just make it personal.
Before we go, I don't know if everybody know my sister here. I always point her out. If you don't know her, this is President Liz Davis, President of the Washington Teachers Union. And whenever she's in the room, I know I'm in the right place. Right? I mean, she has someone that has been a real model of activism, of passion, of clarity. And Liz, I just want to thank you for always being on that battlefield for all of us. And that's why we support you so very much.
And thank you. I miss civil disobedience. This is the only chance I get to bring it back. So I needed to ask that question because I had a discussion with some of the labor leaders at the Labor Council meeting on Monday, which, and I basically am straightforward as you are, Reverend Hagler, in saying this is so inconsistent. I don't understand any questions or disagreement with this campaign to do this, because I thought that this labor community supported the bill. So if you support the bill, why would we not support the repeal of the repeal? And it basically made me realize that we have, as a labor community, why we have weakened ourselves over the past 2 decades to the point where we're now just basically used as any way we can be used by council members. Because that's like the kiss of death, and how disrespectful it is to the labor community to say, sorry, I'm in a church, screw your vote. Basically, that's what it's saying. And I know that our members, our teachers especially, who teach civics lessons in the classroom and out of the classroom, would certainly want to know that our union sees this as an important thing because it affects the families of our kids. So I want to thank you all for doing this, because this is a perfect example of what, I think she mentioned, modeling what we say we should be about.
So we could use whatever help you can do. Maybe you could set up something with Jackie, and Jackie Cheatham, we could go and sit down with her. I talked to her the night of I'll Be There Awards, but just briefly.
Right, she mentioned that,
Right.
but I do think that there needs to be a further discussion, even if we have to do a conference call with her and some of the leaders in the executive board.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so important that if you have the choice, then you are in a different position than the majority of workers. If you have the choice to opt in, if you have the choice to participate, if you have the choice to drop out, then you are not representative of the majority of workers in this town. We are involved because there is no choice when it comes to ensuring the power of our vote. That is something that we cannot take for granted, because at some point, there may come a time when an authority, a supposed authority, takes away something that you support at their own will and discretion due to some outside interest that's financing their participation as the authority over a governing body. So to me, when I have this discussion, whether you agree with 77 or not is irrelevant.
Right.
This is about all of our power to be in a democracy, to have our representatives actually facilitate the will of the people,
That's right.
which is their given job.
Right.
The facilitators of the will of the people.
Right.
They do not dictate the will of the people, which is what they did by repealing our vote.
Right.
And the very important thing is that these people, if they get away with this, is the
That's
next
just-
move, and the next move, and the next move.
Yeah.
And then we live in a area where this becomes the norm. And it becomes the norm, it's what they do.
Exactly.
So what's the point in voting,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
So some other things to bring up real fast. As far as if someone wants to be recategorized, if an employer wants to pay their employee less, if that employee gets $30 a month in tips, they can give them a sub-minimum wage. We don't think that's ethical. And the point of 77 is to get rid of that ability for employers to recategorize their workers. And there's going to be people say, well, I've talked to tip workers and they're against this. Eric right over here, he's a Domino's delivery driver. He makes more than $30 a month in tips. He's not a server, but he's paid a sub-minimum wage. And nail salon technicians, bellhops. It actually affects a lot of people that aren't just in restaurants and bars.
Like the valets.
The valets. And so we have to maintain, because we're going to get people that are going to say, well, I'm against it because I have talked to people and they're against it. So, and there's different ways that you can frame that logic, that if we were to change if you change the nature of what the job's about, or change what it is, change the industry, and give an example, it's a sort of a straw man argument. But you can change it around and say, well, if we were trying to do away with a different type of job, and those employees wanted to keep that job, do you think that the rest of society has a moral responsibility to say that this should change? It doesn't matter the job of what it is. It's actually the moral courage that we have to say that, you know what, we disagree with the unethical sub-minimum wage system that we have here, and we want to go with what 7 other states in the United States have already done, which is get rid of it entirely. Reverend Lee's talked about quite a bit on maintaining the discussion of this is about the vote, this is about the vote. And that is always a good point to make. But I also have had the experience of dealing with people that say, this is about taking away my tips. And we are going to have to hit both of those.
We have to reverse that.
We have to be able to talk about both of them at once. And the idea of saving our tips is, what Eric brought up was that a tip is property of the person who received the tip. A service charge is property of the establishment. So it is a privilege to go out and eat at a restaurant. And with that privilege comes the employer's responsibility to pay their employees a living wage. If they are going to outsource that wage to the customer and have it be based on their whims and how they feel that day, then we have the moral responsibility to say that that is not right, and we want to change that. And it's not going to happen overnight. 77 was built in to go into effect $1.50 for the sub-minimum wage up until it hits $15 by 2025. So starting 2026, it'll be indexed to inflation at $15 an hour. Everyone, except for government contractors and government employees, everyone will be given the $15 an hour minimum wage. And it's about looking to the future, not looking to the past. I think that goes back to the vote. The concept is like, this is about looking forward. This is about making sure that we have an inclusive society. DC is not a cheap place to live. And a lot of servers that were against it were also, as you said before, not able to even participate in the vote. What I was saying about the service charge part is that the fear factor that you're going to tip less. I remember growing up, my mom had a little tip card that actually said this is how much the meal was and this is what 15% looked like, and she would write that down exactly how much in there, because back then 15% was a little bit more money. As inflation's gone up, the sub-minimum wage has not. It's still $2.15. I'm sorry, $2.13 in like a state like Virginia. DC is a little bit higher. But it's the fact that we feel, I mean, as a former server, I'm destined to always give 20% for the rest of my life. It's an unfortunate dynamic of working in the restaurant industry because you actually see how hard it is. You see that you have to do side work that you're not paid for at all out of that entire experience. You're rolling new silverware together. You have to do that work. No one's going to get paid to do that work, but you have to do it. And I forgot where I was going with it. Nonetheless, we're going to have a lot of stuff going on in the next couple of weeks. And if you haven't yet, please fill out the forms. So we have a...
Sophie, anything you want to say?
I just have a quick question. We have 115 schools, and I just wanted to get the teachers that are DC residents to sign the petition in each of their schools. So I'm just wondering, a volunteer in each school, and of course in our case it would be the union representative, would they need to be sign up as a volunteer?
Yeah. I mean, in order to even get the petitions, you have to somehow categorize yourself within the campaign. So you can be a volunteer, you can be part-time. The difference between part-time, full-time, and being a volunteer is you're going to get paid or you're not going to get paid.
Right.
But you still have to go through the campaign. So we have your contact information. We sign out the number of petitions to that person. There's also something that's more in the weeds, so to speak, is the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act is it prevents government employees from engaging in political activity on the government time. Which if I was a council member and I'm working and the Reverend was my subordinate and I said, today we are going to go out and campaign today, under the Hatch Act I'd be violating the law because he's my subordinate. He can't say no to me because I'm his boss. So the other side of that is if they're teachers, the best time that they should sign is on lunch break or after school, because then they're not on the government dime.
Okay.
And so it's important for a lot of different things. It's nonpartisan. So there's always people that are going to say, well, I can't sign this because I'm not registered in a political party, or I can't sign this because I don't engage in political activity. And the response the boilerplate response that I would give is like, you're a registered voter, yes. Well, this is about your participation in the democracy.
Right.
And kind of framing it that like, there's people say, well, I don't want to be put on a government list by signing this. Because especially for Initiative 71, which was involved with cannabis, people didn't want to like, oh, they were afraid of being put on a government list.
You're already on the government list.
Well, the response is, and that's actually a response. You're on the government list, it's called the voter roll. If you're registered to vote, you're on the government list.
But if you need help, if you need some facilitation, that's
Okay. It's good.
Thank y'all.
you can work.
I'm gonna give you my number.